Hello students, this session we'll be doing physicochemical aspects of muscle contraction in the muscle physiology. This is Dr. Hemlata from Maharani Science College for Women, Bangalore. So the contraction of the muscle brings about movement, in turn locomotion. If you look at the course of evolution, it is this mobility which has made the animals much more successful as they have the capacity to move from one place to another. And this movement is because of the very well developed muscular system, and the muscles contract, bringing about movement. When the muscle is contracting, it needs energy as the fuel. The primary source of energy comes from ATP. ATP provides energy for the activity which is a low intense activity, routine activity or resting condition, like the breathing happening when you are at rest. At that time ATP will provide the energy. Then you have phosphocreatine, lipids, glucose, glycogen. We will see how each one of them will come in the way to provide the energy during the muscle contraction. So adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is the primary source of energy. The body doesn't store energy. When you start doing some physical activity like walking or running, then whatever ATP is available, that will be enough only for 3 seconds. Then other biochemical pathways will start releasing the energy for the muscular movement or the contraction of the muscle. The next one which gives energy is the creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate will supply energy which will be enough for about 8 to 10 seconds. So you are sitting, then you will start moving. You will start running, let us say. For the first 3 seconds, the ATP which is present as such will give the energy. For the next 8 to 10 seconds, creatine phosphate is giving the energy. Then we will see what happens. So in this, you will see there are 3 pictures. The first one showing the muscle in a resting state. So when the muscle is resting, what the ATP is there in the body, so it gives releases a phosphate which will be picked up by the creatine, and it results in the formation of creatine phosphate and ADP. And this creatine phosphate is a store of energy. So some energy is in the form of ATP. Some energy from ATP will be transferred to creatine and stored in the form of creatine phosphate. So in a resting state, there is energy available as ATP to an extent, and some energy available in the form of creatine phosphate. When the muscle becomes active, then first ATP will hydrolyze, it gives energy. Then creatine phosphate will hydrolyze in the presence of the enzyme creatine kinase, and creatine will be released back and ATP will be produced, and this ATP will be used up by the muscle for the energy. This is the first step. Next, glucose which is there in the blood will provide energy. When glucose is broken down in glycolysis, it results in the formation of ATP. And when that is not enough, then the glycogen which is present in the muscle will get converted to glucose, and this glucose in glycolysis is converted to ATP and pyruvate, and this pyruvate is broken down. The pyruvate, there are 2 pathways. If enough oxygen is there, then it enters into aerobic respiration. If the oxygen is not enough, then it gets converted to lactic acid. So when there is a strenuous activity which you are not used to, then enough oxygen is not available for the working muscle. Whatever oxygen, it will take some time for the body to realize that the oxygen requirement is increased. So till then, anaerobic respiration will support, and that will be releasing the energy. In the absence of the oxygen in the working muscle, anaerobic respiration takes place where pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid, and that will start releasing the energy. But if you look at the aerobic respiration, the amount of ATP produced is much more in aerobic respiration compared to the anaerobic respiration. Then you have the blood glucose, then the pyruvic acid, and also fatty acids. When you exercise, fats also get broken down. All of them will be converted to the energy which will be used up by the cell in the cellular respiration. It enters the mitochondria. Then it will be converted to ATP. ATP will fuel the muscular contraction. And in addition, heat, carbon dioxide and water also will be generated. So what happens? First, the immediate energy will come from the ATP, which is stored in the resting muscle, which will sustain for a few seconds. Then ATP will be generated by creatine phosphate, somewhere between 8 to 15 seconds. Then glucose molecule will start breaking down. It produces 2 ATP and 2 pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid can enter aerobic respiration if there is oxygen. If there is no oxygen, it gets converted to lactic acid. So whenever the muscle is overworking and the body is not giving enough oxygen, it is not getting enough oxygen, then it enters anaerobic respiration, and this lactic acid will not produce enough ATP, and as a result the muscle will start feeling tired. Muscle fatigue will happen. This is when you are doing some strenuous exercise which the body is not used to. Whereas if you are doing some sustained activity, let us say you are just walking and you are used to that. People who are very active, they condition their entire system in such a way that there is no problem in the production of the ATP. So for this sustained activity, aerobic respiration will support. Like walking, cycling, swimming, where it is conditioned, then aerobic respiration will support, where glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen and lot of ATP is produced. 95% of the ATP required by the body when resting or when the body is doing moderate activity will come from aerobic respiration, where the glucose is broken down, oxidative phosphorylation will happen inside the mitochondria, and energy is generated which is used for the activity. Glycogen is the store of energy in the muscle. Extra glucose is converted to glycogen. It will be stored either in the muscle or in the liver. In the muscle glycogen will liberate energy which will last for about 90 seconds. For this, oxygen is not needed. The moment you start strenuous activity, it will take some time for your respiratory pathway. We did this in our respiration chapter, where the chemoreceptors will sense the amount of carbon dioxide produced, amount of hydrogen ion produced, that will be taken to the brain. The brain will in turn send the message to the heart and to the respiratory system to increase the rate of respiration, so that when the ventilatory rate, that is exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen happens, then more oxygen is available, and that oxygen will be taken to the working muscle. For that, some time is needed. So till then, anaerobic respiration will happen, and a byproduct will be the lactic acid. The lactic acid is the one which causes pain in the muscle. When you do an unusual activity, you get pain in the muscle. That is because of the accumulation of the lactic acid, which causes the muscle soreness. And that's the reason why today if you do activity, tomorrow you should not rest. You have to do activity so that you take in more oxygen to resolve the accumulation of the lactic acid. In the aerobic respiration, so when you start doing some exercise, within 2 minutes, the body will start supplying it will start supplying the oxygen to the muscle. It will take about 2 minutes for the ventilatory rate to get adjusted and for the respiratory system to take in more oxygen, and to supply that to the muscle it will take about 2 minutes, and after that aerobic respiration will start. And when oxygen is present, aerobic respiration will generate ATP by breaking down glucose, which is sufficient to sustain the activity. So in between, anaerobic respiration will support the activity, and then lactic acid will cause muscle soreness. So what are the sources for aerobic respiration? The muscle cell will be supplied with glucose. That will be the first one to release the energy. When that is over, it will start collecting the glucose from the intestine if it is available. It enters into the blood, and the blood will supply that glucose to the working muscle. If that also is not enough, then the glycogen which is present in the liver breaks down and releases glucose, which is brought to the muscle. The fat reserves which are present in the muscle will start breaking down. Suppose if somebody is starving, let us say for one whole day, if one person had not eaten, the next day morning he will start exercising. Then if no source of carbohydrate is available, no glucose source is available, protein itself, just not for one day, it takes some days for the body protein to break. If nothing is available, then the body protein itself will break to release the energy. Aerobic respiration is the slowest of all the three systems, but the supply of the ATP will be continuous, which will sustain the activity for several hours. There is what is called as Cori cycle, which was described by Carl Ferdinand Cori and Gerty Teresa Radnitz. It is called as Cori cycle or glucose lactate cycle. Here, there is a cooperation between the working skeletal muscle and the liver when the oxygen is less. When the oxygen is less, there is a coordination between the working muscle and the liver. What is that? The conversion of glucose to lactic acid, that is by anaerobic method. Anaerobic glycolysis will happen in the skeletal muscle. Now this lactic acid will diffuse from the muscle cell, enters into the bloodstream, which is taken to the liver. In the liver, the lactate will be converted to glucose by hepatic gluconeogenesis, and this glucose in turn will leave the hepatocytes and enter into the bloodstream, and it will be taken back to the skeletal muscle. So when there is no oxygen, skeletal muscle is producing lactic acid, which is transported to the liver by the blood. There it is converted to glucose by hepatic gluconeogenesis, which will come back to the skeletal muscle. This is called as Cori cycle. This is the coordination between the working muscle and the liver under low oxygen conditions. Now, what are the physical changes? So, till now we looked at the chemical aspect of the muscle contraction. That is, mainly we looked at the energy source, how the energy is obtained for the purpose of contraction from different sources. Now we will look at some of the physical changes that will happen during muscle contraction. When the muscle is contracting, the metabolic activity is more and the temperature raises and heat will be produced. That's why when you are exercising, your body temperature will go up, it will start sweating. In order to dissipate the heat, body will start sweating. So that is because of the heat generation during the contraction of the muscle. This is one of the change what you observe. There is electricity generation. That is, when the physical activity is happening, the information is coming from the brain. The brain is sending the information in the form of nerve impulse, that is action potential, that is the electrical energy. That information from the brain comes to the muscle. It enters into the muscle. Once it enters into the muscle, the electrical energy will be converted to mechanical energy, and this mechanical energy will generate the force and that force will be used up for the movement of the muscle. So this is the change where electrical energy will be converted to chemical and to mechanical, generating the force required for muscle contraction and movement. There are also volume changes which will happen in the muscle. The muscle can contract, the length of the muscle can reduce or it can get stretched depending upon the type of the activity you are doing. Suppose you are lifting something very heavy, then the muscles will contract. Suppose if you are pushing something very heavy, then the muscles will stretch. So there are different types of contractions happening, bringing about either pulling or stretching, and when this happens, the muscle will either reduce or it will get expanded. That is the change in the volume of the muscle. There are also changes noted in the optical properties of the muscle fibers, and sound is produced during actinomyosin contraction. When the muscle is contracting, it is the actin and myosin which brings about the contraction. So when that happens, sound will be generated because of the contraction of actin and myosin. So these are some physical changes noted during muscle contraction. So when a skeletal muscle contraction happens, how it happens? The muscle will be stimulated by a motor nerve. That is, the nerve which is bringing the information from the brain to the muscle is a motor nerve. And this motor nerve will land on the muscle fiber and it transmits the action potential into the muscle, and that information will be taken inside the muscle fiber where the myofilaments are located. Then the actin and myosin will slide one over the other. When the actin and myosin will slide one over the other, the muscle fiber will become short. When the muscle fiber shortens, it brings about contraction of the skeletal muscle and the movement of the skeletal muscle. So when the skeletal muscle contraction is happening, chemical energy or heat energy gets converted into mechanical energy and it brings about movement, for which the nerve impulse from the brain should come to the muscle. Now, the junction between the nerve and the muscle is called as a neuromuscular junction. All of you have studied the synapse. Synapse is a connection between one nerve and the other. So, the information when it comes from the brain through the nerves, the information will be passed on from one nerve to other, then one nerve to another. Finally, it reaches the destination, that is the skeletal muscle. And in the skeletal muscle, the junction between the nerve and the muscle is called as neuromuscular junction. This neuromuscular junction will have a small space between the nerve and the muscle, which you call it as the synapse. So this synapse is between the motor neuron and the skeletal muscle. You call it as neuromuscular junction. And a process called as excitation contraction coupling will happen. This is a physiological response in which an electrical stimulus is converted to a mechanical response. That is, action potential generated in the brain is brought to the muscle. When it reaches the muscle, the first thing which receives the electrical stimulus is the membrane of the muscle, sarcolemma. From the sarcolemma, the information passes down the T-tubule, that is the infolding of the sarcolemma. Information passes through the T-tubule and it enters into the T-tubule, and from there the action potential will bring about lot of changes, and that we will be studying, and we will look at how the muscle contraction will happen later. So if you look at this picture, you will see that there is the nerve ending. So the green, what you're seeing, the green colored picture is the nerve. It's a motor nerve. So if you remember the nerve picture, you have the axon, then you have the cell body, dendrites. So the dendrites is the region where the action potential, close to the cell body, the action potential will be elicited, or the dendrites will receive the action potential and it will be conducted along the axon. Then it will pass through the axon, that is the transmission, synaptic transmission along the axon, which you have already studied in your nervous system chapter. Once it reaches the axon terminal, then the axon terminal will have a slightly swollen structure called as end bulb. So this is the end bulb of the axon terminal of a motor neuron. If you look at the inner aspect of the end bulb, you will see that it contains mitochondria and also membrane bound vesicles called as synaptic vesicles. These synaptic vesicles will contain the neurotransmitters. The most common neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is present inside these synaptic vesicles. So when the action potential will reach the axon terminal, then it brings about some changes in the axon terminal. What are those changes? Calcium ions will enter into the synaptic, it enters into the axon terminal, that is the end bulb. Calcium ions will enter into that. When the calcium ions enter, it brings about changes. The synaptic vesicles will fuse to the membrane of the axon terminal. Now this is called as the presynaptic membrane. So this presynaptic membrane, which is near the synaptic cleft is the gap between the axon terminal and the muscle membrane. The space between the nerve end and the muscle membrane is the synaptic cleft. So the synaptic vesicle will fuse to the wall of the axon terminal and it opens and releases the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. So the acetylcholine will be released into the synaptic cleft by a process called as exocytosis. By exocytosis, the the acetylcholine will be released. Once the acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft, then it binds to the receptors which are present on the membrane of the muscle. Now, the membrane of the muscle present near the synaptic cleft is called as postsynaptic membrane. So here the membrane of the muscle, that is the sarcolemma, that is the postsynaptic membrane, is folded at the junction and it will have receptors. The neurotransmitter acetylcholine will bind to the receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane and there it will elicit action potential. Eliciting action potential is reversal of the charges. When the action potential is elicited, it will cause the adjacent location of the membrane to elicit another action potential. Thus, a wave of action potential will be generated and that will pass through the T-tubule. T-tubule is the invagination of the muscle membrane, that is the sarcolemma. So, action potential enters through the T-tubule and then it enters into the muscle fiber. This is what is happening at the neuromuscular junction. when the action potential reaches the end bulb, the presynaptic membrane, calcium ions will enter, synaptic vesicles will fuse with the presynaptic membrane, acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, will be released into the synaptic cleft. That will bind to the postsynaptic membrane. The receptors are present on the postsynaptic membrane. The neurotransmitters will bind to the receptors. So from there, the action potential will be initiated on the muscle membrane. That will generate action potential in the adjacent part of the membrane, creating a wave of action potential which ultimately enters into the T-tubule and it enters into the muscle fiber. So in this picture, it is showing elaborately. Here you can see the muscle membrane is there. At one point, you have the neuromuscular junction. When the nerve reaches the muscle fiber, it will branch and it will form neuromuscular junction in many places. Once it reaches the action potential reaches the muscle membrane, what it does, calcium ions enters into the terminal button. It's also called as terminal button. Then calcium ions will enter into the terminal button. Then the neurotransmitter will be released, which will be picked up by the receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane, which will generate action potential along the adjacent membrane, which passes into the T-tubules. Once it passes into the T-tubules, very close to the T-tubules are the terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is the triad. In the triad, in the center, there is T-tubule. On either side, there are calcium ions. There are the enlargement of the sarcoplasmic reticulum forming the terminal cisternae. So the two terminal cisternae with one T-tubule is called as a triad, and sarcoplasmic reticulum is the storehouse of calcium ions. So once the nerve impulse passes through the T-tubules, it will activate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this sarcoplasmic reticulum in turn will start releasing calcium ions. Once the calcium ions are released, these calcium ions will be picked up by the muscle. In the muscle, there are the myofilaments, which we have already studied. We have studied about the actin. In the actin, there are two regulatory proteins, tropomyosin and troponin. In troponin, there are three subunits, troponin I, troponin C, and I for actin, C for calcium, and there is another one, T for tropomyosin. So these calcium will bind to the troponin C unit. Once it binds to the troponin C unit, then sliding mechanism will happen. So this we will do it in the next chapter, that is the sliding mechanism of the muscle proteins. So here what we learnt was the excitation coupling contraction. It starts with the nerve impulse. Then the nerve impulse is transmitted at the neuromuscular junction. It enters the muscle. Then it enters first it will initiate action potential on the membrane. Then it enters the T-tubule. Then near the triad, it will activate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which in turn releases calcium ions, and these calcium ions in turn will bind to the troponin C unit, and this will bring about the sliding filament mechanism, which we will do in the next chapter. So what is that? You will see when the action potential reaches the muscle, it brings about depolarization of the sarcolemma. When depolarization of the sarcolemma, this is just a revision for you. So generally what will happen in a resting state, you will see that sodium ions are present more on the outer side of the nerve membrane or the muscle membrane, and potassium ions will be more on the inner side of the membrane. So when the action potential reaches the membrane, it brings about depolarization, that is the reversal of the charges. What happens during that? Sodium ions will enter inside, potassium ions will move out by the sodium potassium ATPase pump. This brings about depolarization of the sarcolemma, and it is the first step in the contraction of the muscle. So, depolarization of the sarcolemma brought about by influx of sodium ions and efflux of potassium ions is the first step in the contraction process. Stimulation of the skeletal muscle. So, this muscle is stimulated now. So, if it is stimulated in one point, it results in a wave of action potential continuously stimulating the entire muscle. Then the information will be taken along the T-tubule. Then it reaches the triad where sarcoplasmic reticulum will be activated and it releases calcium ions from the terminal cisternae. And this calcium ions will initiate the contraction process when it binds to troponin. So, we have looked into the first part of the physical aspect and chemical aspect of contraction in this. In the second part, I will be giving little information about the different types of contractions which are responsible for muscle movement in this chapter. So, in physico-chemical aspect of contraction, I have made two videos. In part 1, we studied about the energy aspect of the contraction and the excitation coupling theory of the contraction. In part 2, you will be doing the different types of contraction. So, with this, I am completing the first part of physico-chemical aspect of contraction. Thank you, students.